The following video is intended to introduce the new Utah Educator Licensing System that is going into effect on July 1st, 2020. A copy of the presentation used in the video is available at the link in the video description. This video was recorded on November 4th, 2019 in a Utah State Board of Education staff meeting. All information in this video is current as of that date. If you have questions regarding the content of this video, please submit them via email to licensing@schools.utah.gov.
I wanted to kind of prep you with two things. The first is this presentation is in two parts. The licensing change is massive. It has massive implications throughout the system. So we're going to start with the why. Why are we doing this? That's always important when we're talking about change. And so we're going to go through the why part, and we're going to take any questions at the end of that, because as we go through this, the most important part of this presentation is not what I tell you, it's what I don't tell you. As we go through this, I want you to write down questions, put them on a piece of paper, put them on your computer, and we will circle back. I'm hoping that the majority of this time will actually be a discussion and answering questions with each other, okay? Because ultimately that's what we're trying to accomplish here. So the first section is all about the why, and the second section is an overview of the what. And again, focusing on what questions do I not answer. As you're going through this, write things down, we'll circle back to it, because there's going to be a lot of questions, okay? All right. Everybody should know what this is. This is part of the board's strategic plan. So this is what the board is trying to accomplish. Each student is taught by effective educators who are supported by effective school leaders. Licensing is one of the ways that we ensure effectiveness of both educators and leaders. Licensing's purpose is to help ensure effective teachers and leaders. So one of the things that gets thrown around as we talk about licensing is the current system. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. Everybody believes it's a simple system, that it is exactly what it needs to be. Why are we bothering to change? The problem with the current licensing system is that it is an iceberg. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3 are what's above the water. That's what the parents can see. That's what teachers are aware of. But the majority of the licensing rules, and I know this because I've worked in licensing for 12 years now, is beneath the surface. There are things that people can do with licensing when you learn about them the first time, it's like, wait, why can they do that? It's really ridiculous. When we talk about licensing, every single one of these boxes here, notice Level 1, Level 2, Level 3 is not there, right? Every single one of those boxes is either a license or a way to get a license. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is how many I fit in the picture. Okay? So the problem with licensing is it's too complicated. So here's what happened with the board. This journey began in August of 2016. In August of 2016, the board created the Academic Pathway to Teaching license. This was a license that you could receive if you had a bachelor's degree and passed an assessment in the content area you were going to teach. And you received this APT license. Now, whatever we want to talk about APT, there was political and public feedback to the board that there were some problems. Okay? There were a lot of arguments, a lot of discussions. So ultimately, what happened is in September of 2016, the board decided, look, we have been tinkering with licensing for 30 years. It is time to start over. What had happened is that licensing had become this conglomerated mess of hodgepodge things patched together, because it had this core of Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, and then every couple of years something would come up with the legislature, with the board, with districts, with charters, and it became this hodgepodge of an unmanageable, unknowable system. All the iceberg beneath the water. So in 2016 September, the board created a task force to examine educator licensing. And at the beginning of this discussion, literally on the table was, what is the purpose of educator licensing? Should we be doing educator licensing? Does it have a place in the state of Utah? This board task force was led by a board member and had multiple board members that were the primary participants, and then staff supported them. And they worked for a year. That's why the next circle there is September 2017. Because what happened was they started meeting with stakeholders. They met with parents, with universities, with districts, with charter schools, with university preparation people, with legislators. And they went through this process of trying to gather as much feedback as possible. And ultimately, having focus groups in that summer of 2017 to see if this is where we were going to go. And that task force reported out to the board in September 2017. And what happened was the board made a motion that staff would start working with the legislature to modify statute to allow for the creation of this new vision that the board had come up with. So that's literally where we had to start, because level 1, level 2, level 3 are legislatively in statute, or they were at the time. So staff works with the legislature in that March 2018 legislative session. They pass the recodification of all the education statute, and included in that is the aspect of change for licensing. So then where do we go? So the first core rule is R277-301. That's where we started. We started it first in May, goes through a public hearing, gets revised, so it goes through another public comment period, and ultimately, in December of 2018, the core rules of this new system pass, and they are published in the Utah Administrative Rules. So if you're curious as to what that is, again, if you simply go to the Administrative Rules system and go to R277-301, that is the core rule of the changes that we're going to talk about. Now, this new rule is slated to go into effect on January 1, 2020. Now, before you panic, January 1, 2020 is when the rule becomes effective so that staff can work on implementing it. Okay? The actual change to the system, the day the switch flips, is July 1st, 2020. So we're looking at the 2020-2021 school year is when this moves. When it starts, everything it has changed. So there were a couple of things that were very important to the board, and I think it's important to you to know these things as we've talked about them. The first thing is the board realized through that process that they had not engaged enough with stakeholders. And so throughout the rulemaking process, we've had a very specific way of doing focus groups, creating a draft that goes out to the public, and then the draft is presented to the board. We've been very methodical about that work through the rules. One of the things that is the other big takeaway from the board task force was the desire for consistency in requirements. One of the core problems with that iceberg that we deal with right now is it wasn't fair. And I know life isn't fair, but we don't like things that aren't fair, right? And so what was happening was you had different standards set for different pathways to licensing. APT had one standard. ARL had a separate standard. Universities had a third standard. They all had different standards that they were held to. And so it was not consistent. So one of the things the board wanted to say is, we're less interested in the path, we're more interested in the finish line. We want everyone to have consistent expectations to receive a license. The last one, and this will make more sense as we get into the what, but as we start talking about this, please be aware that the board very much philosophically saw the LEA-Specific License as the exception, not the rule. Now, if you don't know the system very well, that'll make more sense in a few minutes. But an LEA-specific license is intended to be the exception. It's intended to deal with the 5% of issues that arise. So that's the first part. Well, and here are the rules. This is a little bit dated at this point. We have 2 rules remaining that we have to have changed. Number 1 is R277-520, which is the rule that talks about what a teacher has to have to teach. Like, how do you know if they're qualified or not? And number 2 is the renewal rule. R277-500 is current renewal rule. So that's the why. So now you know a couple of things. You know that July 1, 2020 is when we're flipping some magical switch. And you kind of understand why we're doing it. So what I would like you to do is take a moment, turn to someone that's your shoulder partner, and ask them a question. All right, let's get into some details. So now we're going to talk about the what. Okay. In the new licensing system, there will only be 3 licenses. Right now, there's literally like 16 of them. Okay? There will be 3 licenses. There is associate educator licenses, professional educator licenses, and LEA-specific educator licenses. Now, here's your 30-second definition of these licenses. If you want the details, go to the rule. Associate is I'm learning how to be a teacher. Professional, I have demonstrated all of the state-established competencies to be a teacher. LEA-specific, I have met locally defined competencies for being a teacher in that local agency. So faster, learn to be a teacher, is a teacher, has met local requirements. Those are the only 3 types of licenses that will exist. Let that sink in for a second. We're going to get to questions too, by the way. So remember to write down questions as they come up here. Now, some of you may or may not be familiar with the way the current licensing system works, where we have licenses, license areas, and endorsements. If you're not familiar with this, what it is, any educator in Utah has a single license. Right now, so that's level 1, level 2, level 3. So that's your license. Then underneath your license, you can have multiple license areas. So you can have a secondary license area and an elementary license area, or an admin license area, or a school counselor license area. That's a license area. And then under those license areas, you can have endorsements. So most of you are educators, so think about your own license real quick. So me personally, I have level 2. I have secondary and admin are my license areas. And then on my secondary license, I have a math and chemistry endorsement. So those are the different tiers, if you will, the structure of licenses. That structure still exists in the new system. I'm going to show you a graphic of how that will look like. But think about this. The idea of associate, professional, and LEA-specific applies to all 3 of these levels. So here is an example of a particular individual. And again, you can place this with your own license if that helps you. So I have a professional license. I have a professional license area. So I'm going to say I have a professional license and professional secondary license area. And I have a professional math endorsement, because that's what my degree was in. My degree is in math. So I have professional, professional secondary, professional math. Now, what these represent, associate and LEA specific, represent endorsements under my professional secondary. So associate, so let's say this is the associate theater endorsement. That means I am learning to be a theater teacher. I already have the competencies of being a secondary teacher. I just need to, I have math, I'm going to demonstrate theater. And then, for whatever reason, my LEA has decided that they want me to teach music. I apologize for using fine arts twice. But for whatever reason, they've said Travis knows how to sing, so he should teach choir, which is a terrible idea, by the way. But anyway, so they've given me an LEA-specific endorsement in music. So that means I can teach music solely within that LEA. Alternatively, you can think of it like this. With the other side over here, associate, so my professional license area is secondary. My associate license area is elementary. So I'm learning how to be an elementary teacher. I haven't demonstrated all the elementary stuff yet. And then I might have an associate reading endorsement or an LEA-specific, I'm making one up. I keep going to fine arts because Kathy talked to me. But that's the idea of how the structure works. So take a moment before we move on. Again, we'll take questions at the end. Put your license in this structure. Think about what your license is in this structure. Not going to take very long on this, just kind of think it through. Okay, let's keep moving on. As we get into these licenses, we've tried to make things as consistent and as simple as possible. So there are 3 types of requirements that we talk about for each license. Every license has content requirements, pedagogical requirements, and then general. So it's what I'm teaching, how I teach it, and then the catch-all of everything else, right? Content, pedagogy, general. So let's talk about an associate license. So remember, the associate license is I'm learning to be a teacher. Here's what I need to do. I have to do the background check. I have to do the ethics review. I have to demonstrate that I have had academic success, either through a degree, or I'm in a degree program, or I have completed a CTE skill certification. So that's my demonstration of my that's one of the general requirements. One thing to bear in mind, these are valid for 2 years with a possibility of a 1-year extension. These are not limitless. Once you've started teaching, if you're using an associate license, you have a maximum of 3 years to move to professional. Those are the general requirements. Content. For elementary, we will have a content test. Secondary, we will have a content test or a major in the subject. Now, those of you that know anything about licensing, that is a change. So we're saying in a secondary setting, a degree is equivalent or good enough as a content test in the same area. Now, if I have a minor, I still have to take a test. Okay? But we'll come back to that. And or lastly, or excuse me, not lastly, all others. So that's elementary and secondary, right?
Yes.
Everything else that you can think of has to be in a university-based program. So that's special ed, school counselor, school psychologist, leadership. All of those things have to be in a university-based preparation program. Whether it's alternative or non-alternative is a whole different question. But that's what it has to be. That's the content requirements. And then the pedagogy requirements. These are very basic. They are the professional learning modules on 4 topics. This is what the board rule literally says. They have to complete 4 professional learning modules on educator ethics, classroom management and instruction, basic special education law and instruction, the Utah Effective Teaching Standards. So those are the 4. Or they have to be in a university-based program. The assumption being that if you're in a university-based program, those 4 topics are part of your program. Now, by the way, when we talk about these modules, we need to talk about what those are. Those are not semester-long classes. When we presented this to the board, the vision that the board had, what these modules are, is I get hired on Friday. The principal tells me to go do these modules over the weekend, and I start teaching on Monday. So this is not a comprehensive special education law and instruction, right? You're not going to be able to differentiate at a super deep level from 8 hours. So these are introductory modules, just short, brief, trying to prevent harm, essentially. That's what the purpose of a licensing is, to prevent harm. We can come back to that if we need to. So for a professional license, so associate is where I start. I'm learning how to be a teacher. Professional means I've demonstrated everything. So the first thing is you have to do all of those associate requirements. All of those associate requirements have to be met. And then you have to be recommended by either a board-approved program or have a license in another state. So to move to professional, you cannot do it by yourself. You need the support of a program or have a license in another jurisdiction. And by the way, program does include university or LEA. We'll talk more about what that means. For content, to receive a professional license, you must have demonstrated all content competencies as established by the superintendent. For those of you that are endorsement or content specialists, these are your endorsement requirements. Okay. These are established by the superintendent. We are acting under the superintendent's direction when we create those endorsement requirements, and that's where this is. So anyone moving associate to professional has to meet these competencies. So if you want to think about what we talked about earlier with Robert and Kathy, APT lets you take a test to get a license. Associate does the same thing, kind of. You take a test, you can get associate. But to move to professional, everyone has to meet the same requirements. That's one of the problems now is APT doesn't have to. Anyway. Pedagogy. They have to demonstrate all the pedagogy competencies established by the superintendent and in board rule. The big one, though, is the second bullet there. To move to a professional license, you must pass a pedagogical performance assessment. A pedagogical performance assessment, if you're curious, there are two current vendor market ones. If you're curious at looking what the heck is this thing. EdTPA and PPAT. Those are the two. Those are the current vendor ones. Theoretically, we have state-established standards, so someone else could create another. As long as it meets the standards, it would work. The best way to think about this is thinking of it as the national board process, because that's actually where it was created from. For example, the EdTPA specifically, and I'm just speaking to this because it's an easy description. EdTPA started at Stanford, and what they did is they took the national board process, which is a process designed for master teachers, and put it down at a more initial level. So in this process, you're creating a lesson, you're identifying differential needs of students, you're looking at accommodations you have to make, you're actually doing the lesson, videotaping it, and then reflecting on that lesson. And all of that is submitted to someone who's an evaluator, who is typically a teacher or university prep professor or a principal. They're educators evaluating these things, and there's rubrics. But it's essentially a portfolio, a meaningful portfolio assessment.
Teacher work sample.
Teacher work sample, that's another way to say it. Yes. So in order to get professional, I have to pass that. Whether I complete USU's program, I do Davis School District's program, or American Preparatory Academy's program, I have to pass this assessment. Okay. Now, for LEA-specific, things are a little bit simpler. Because LEA-specific is intended to be the local exceptions where the rules don't make sense in our rural schools, in our small schools. So essentially, the requirements are very basic. They have to do a background check, they have to do the ethics review, they have to have the request approved in a public board meeting. The first time they renew it, it has to be up for the state board's review. And they can request these for 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on what they want to do. So if I'm Park City and I don't have to mess around and I say, you're an out-of-state licensed person, I'm going to give you a year to get your out-of-state license, I'll request an LEA-specific for 1 year. And I expect by the end of that year, you'll have, transferred your license in. Or it might be, oh, we've set up a program that's 3 years, so we actually want you to be on this LEA specific for 3 years before we move forward. Ultimately, the goal being that most people that receive these LEA specific licenses are hopefully on a path to meet the associate and then professional requirements. That the long-term use of these types of licenses are limited to the ridiculous situations. If you look at the board agenda for this month, look at the expanded eminence. Okay? Those expanded eminence are the ones where the board is thinking, yes, we need a long-term solution. In the consent calendar, if any of you are curious. And everything else is whatever the LEA establishes. They have to have a policy on this. They have to vote in a public meeting. But if, quite frankly, if the community of that school is comfortable with someone without a degree teaching 7th grade science, that's their choice. The assumption is if the parents are not okay with that, then they would take action on that. Now, whether or not that's true is a politically debatable point, but that's the vision. That's what they're trying to accomplish. Making sure everybody knows, because here's what's happening right now is people are getting this expanded eminence and this LEA specific and eminence and all these different weird licenses that exist, and parents have no clue. Parents have zero idea that they're sending their child to a school where that teacher is on a separate licensing track than what they're expecting. The other part of this rule that's important to note is when they use these licenses, and all of them will, they have to post their licensing percentages on their school website. So they have to disclose to their parents, this is the percentage of the various licenses that we employ.
But they don't have to say which teachers.
Yes, good point. So they have to publish it at an aggregate level. They are not required to publicly indicate each teacher's. Though, technically, if the parent was interested, they can go to our website and pull up the license of anybody, right? Okay. So the last thing we're going to talk about before we really get into questions, and I have no idea how much time I have, I've probably used it all.
Yep.
I'm going to go longer.
Some of these people have other things to do, so.
You have to go. Level 2 or 3 license holders, what's going to happen? If you have a level 1, a standard level 1, level 2 or level 3 license, you will have a professional license on July 1, 2020. It'll change. If you are currently a level 1 teacher looking to upgrade, some of those rules have changed. We won't get into the details, but we can talk about that privately if you have any questions. ARL and APT. So the transition for ARL and APT is a little bit more complex. But bear in mind that, excuse me, lost my train of thought. If they are currently in a program, we are going to hold them to that program. So, or grandfather them if you want to think about it. So if I'm in ARL right now, and I'm switching to the new system, next July we'll have a choice. Me and my principals can sit down and say, do I finish my ARL, or do I do this new requirement stuff? So they'll have the choice, because whatever makes sense in their particular case may vary. SAEPs, for those of you that govern SAEPs simply become associate endorsements. Anything else that currently exists just kind of goes away. So if I'm currently on an LEA-specific license, if I'm currently on a letter of authorization, I'm going to have to do something new in the licensing in the new system. Yes, ma'am. We'll come back here next.
Okay, so let's say an SLP just graduates and is recommended for their license. They start out at the associates?
No.
They have a professional.
So if an individual, this is a really good question. Yes, the question is, if a person completes a university program, do they start with an associate license? The answer to that question is no. Because they have completed the university program. They've completed that assessment. They've done all those steps. And the university actually recommends them for a professional license. An associate license is more like a student teacher internship ARL license. So one of the changes that we have to think about as we're moving forward with mentoring and induction, Right now, we've had licensing helping us with this level 1, level 2 mentoring induction stuff. Licensing is not induction. The board was very clear. They wanted to separate licensing and employment because employment is a local issue, licensing is a state issue. So they'll come out with this professional license and they'll still be required to be mentored and trained, but that's a requirement for the LEA. We've been superimposing this licensing structure on that and it's actually created more problems than it's solved. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
How is it affecting national board certification?
So national board certification right now allows you to receive a level 3 license, which is a license valid for 7 years rather than a license valid for 5 years. Under the new system, there is no distinction. So there will be no licensing benefit to being a national board certified teacher. However, at this time, the legislature currently funds a $1,000 or $2,000 bonus for anyone that's national board, and they are actually can pay up front the cost of obtaining national board. So there is no longer a licensing incentive to national board, but hopefully you can see we're still supporting it. But there will be no licensing change. So as a content specialist, what we're often used to doing is we're used to reviewing ARL applications, endorsement applications. Where the content specialist lands is the content specialist is still the one who is establishing with their committee those superintendent established content competencies. So your endorsement requirements. They're still doing that. And for the most part, they are a gateway at the professional license point. Whether it's a university program or a district program, we are going to be reviewing their program. And just like we hold WGU accountable if they're not following our endorsement requirements, we're going to hold Davis School District accountable if they're not following our endorsement requirements. So as a content specialist, you'll be working at less of an individual level, more at a macro level of systems. But there will be individual teachers still applying for endorsement, so that will still occur. But the ARL applications you get for eligibility, you're not going to see those because those are part of the program.
SAEPs are still in existence?
Yeah, because they're just an associate endorsement, right?
It's been translated to the associate level instead of.
So if I'm teaching chemistry and I need the endorsement, I demonstrate some level of competency, I get my associate endorsement, and then I earn my professional on the plan that we've agreed to, just like we have now.
I'm a little confused by that.
What happens to the candidate who is either A, university endorsed, or B, following what would be an ARL or some other means, who applies between January 2 and June 31?
So we will continue to, because the advantage is to the way we set up the rules, both rules will actually be in effect. During that 6-month window, both the old rules and the new rules will be in effect. So we'll still be issuing licenses under the old rules. So ARLs that finish up, people who complete their USU program, they're going to be recommended for a level 1 license under the old rules. And then on July 1, the switch flips and they go to professional, from level 1 to professional. Robert?
Just quickly, so when somebody renews an existing teacher, like if they're level 2 or level 3 or whatever, what happens to them?
So when the switch flips, we're not going to, like, all the licenses aren't going to expire in 5 years. That would be terrible. So what will happen is the licenses will change, but the expiration dates will stay the same. So if I'm supposed to renew my license this year, so I renew it, so it's going to expire in 5 years. When it switches to the new one, it'll expire in 5 years. If my license expires the following year, then it's going to switch, and I'll have 1 year to do the new rules. But they'll be okay. I mean, we haven't written that rule yet, but we'll protect them. Trust me.
Okay, last question.
Yes. For people who have elementary licenses and then want to do that secondary thing. So if my example is I'm a math 1-8 license, I'm a 1-8 licensed and I want to do a level 3 or level 4 endorsement. It used to be you need to go through ARL. They can now just do the associate?
No.
Still need
A license area.
But they can take the test to become the associate and then go through that process? Okay.
The license area still requires a program. And two things to bear in mind with what you just said. If you've already got one instructional license, elementary, secondary, special ed, you don't have to take another pedagogical performance assessment. Okay, so they're exempt from that. That's in the rule. And two, we have to create a model alternative program that districts can use if they choose, and we will have in that model a way for that to happen. So we'll be saying, here's the simplistic version of how you do that. Okay. Anyway, thank you for all the questions and the time. I will follow back with directors and superintendents.
Thank you for watching this video. Additional videos that describe more details regarding specific parts of the new licensing system are currently being developed and are tentatively scheduled to be released in January 2020. If you have questions regarding the content of this video, please submit them via email to licensing@schools.utah.gov.